Excuse
Hey,
me.
what's up?
I really like your car.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
May I ask you a personal question?
Yeah, sure. I'm in a hurry, but go for it.
Yeah, so I am interviewing some celebrities in the Loudoun County area. Do you mind if I ride with you and then I make you some questions?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Hop in.
All right. As a real estate agent, what is the best piece of advice you'd give to somebody?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say the best piece of advice is just to get into real estate. As far as do your best to save money for a down payment. Find a property that is suitable, that can cash flow in the long term, and buy your first property if you don't already have one. I would definitely say for most people, real estate's probably going to be their largest investment, and it's probably going to be their most direct way to sort of good financial health. For some people, financial freedom if you really want to go down that route. But for many, I would say that's definitely the best investment one can make. I would say another thing too that people should consider, and this is more of a long-term game if you're really trying to use your house more as an investment and not as a liability. Don't get too emotional on your first house. I think a big mistake a lot of people make is they get so caught up in the emotions of buying that first house, and they settle in that first house and they sort of make it their home. And I think that's completely fine. In my personal opinion though, the issue with that is it makes that first home a liability rather than an asset. Because a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. It's something that you're putting money into. It doesn't give you money back in return. An asset, on the other hand, is something that actually gives you money. And for most people, their house is not an asset, it's a liability. Because they're living in it, it's taking money from them in the form of a mortgage, insurance, taxes, etc. Instead, what the mindset should be is to buy that first property. Don't fall in love with it. Don't get emotionally attached to it. Understand that in about a year or so, you're going to want to use the equity that you put into it. Take that out. Use that equity to buy a second house or two houses if you can, or whatever you can pull off. And then keep doing that until you're financially free or until you're in a good position where you have several positive cash flowing properties. Does that make sense? And then from that point, then once you have all of the cash flow, then once you have all of the assets giving you money and making you financially free, then at that point, you're free to sort of fall in love with your forever home or your dream home. So I would say that's one of the biggest pieces of real estate advice I could give that most people don't really understand, or at least most people don't follow.
And also you said that you wrote a book, actually 4 books. So what are your books about?
That is a great question. One of them's about real estate. It's called Don't Buy a Home Until You Read This. Basically, it's sort of a step-by-step process to buying your very first property. More for the mindset of the general consumer, so more for the average person, not so much for an investor. Because the rules are a bit different if you're trying to buy a property solely as an investment property versus as a residential property to live in. Very short book. Go check it out. It's free on my website. The other books are more of a philosophy-based book, just an accumulation of lessons I learned throughout the years. Which to me is far more valuable than sort of general financial advice out there. I think it's good to learn from mistakes, but it's better to learn from the mistakes of others. And that's sort of what those other 3 books are all about. Just different mistakes or different lessons I've learned, usually the hard way, and sort of compiling them into one big or several books that people can learn from.
Very interesting. I have a question for you.
Yes.
If you were to be given $1 million or $1 million advice, which one would you pick?
That is an interesting question. It's a tough question. I think, me personally, I'd rather take the $1 million than the $1 million advice. I think it depends on what situation everyone's in, but I think there's a lot of lessons that can come from having $1 million and either using it successfully or losing it completely. I think that a lot of times if you get advice, the tough thing about advice is that depending on who gives it, they'll give incomplete advice, or the advice it might lack nuance, and that might actually make it a bit more difficult to use the advice successfully. It's kind of like, imagine some guy has been doing real estate for 40 or 50 years, and some of the fundamental things he takes for granted. If he gives you his advice from where he's at in his life and misses all the stuff in between, and you try to follow it, you might actually fail a lot further than if you were to start on your own without any advice at all and learn from scratch. Does that make sense?
I think so. It's a contrary opinion.
Yeah. I think most people would like to take the advice, and I think the advice is good sometimes, but I think it's important to keep in mind who's giving the advice, how far along they are in their career or in their business or in their lives, and you have to figure out if their advice directly applies to what you want to do with your life. So me personally, I would take the $1 million because I think I'd do a lot better with the $1 million than with $1 billion advice. That's just me though. Hopefully that answers the questions.
Thank you.